Fort Worth Report. I'd certainly like to welcome you to tonight's informed discussion on data centers in Fort Worth and Tarrant County. Certainly an important topic. We've heard from a lot of you in terms of how important it is to get a group together like this and just talk about the issue outside of the misinformation and all of the other hyperbole around the issue. So in the spirit of our nonprofit, nonpartisan newsrooms, we are really just turning down the noise and focusing on the facts tonight. So at the end of tonight's informed discussion, you'll have information that you need in order to make sense of our emerging policies here in Fort Worth and Tarrant County. So for the duration of the event, please be respectful of our panelists and your fellow audience members. Thank you for your cooperation and commitment to creating a more informed Fort Worth. I'd like to recognize our newsroom. Folks in the newsroom, if you'll wave, say hello to everyone there. Thank you so much for all you do in keeping Fort Worth informed. I'd also like to say thank you to all the elected officials in the room. If you'll please stand for a round of applause for being here. And I would also like to thank North Texas Community Foundation for providing the refreshments. And then would like to introduce our venue sponsor, Dr. Quintanilla, who will have a few words for us.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Hector Quintanilla. I'm the Senior Vice President and Provost here at Texas Wesleyan. If you're a first-time visitor, welcome. You're in the Nick and Lou Martin University Center. We're awfully proud of this facility. It was a game changer for us when it opened back in 2018. So here at Texas Wesleyan, we really kind of just bow tied our summer sessions with a commencement ceremony on August 15th for 105 advanced practice nursing students. So 95 of those students were doctorate of nurse anesthesia practice students. We have the largest nurse anesthesia program for students in the country, and those students will be taking their boards in about 2 weeks. And last time they took their boards, we had a 100% pass rate. So that's a lot of CRNAs that will be out in the industry supporting the community and also healthcare in general. Today we welcome 360 freshmen into our dorm. So our semester for the fall is kicking off much like other institutions locally. We're looking forward also this year to pursuing our membership in the NCAA Division II. We received an invitation to join the Lone Star Conference, and we're very excited about that, along with the progress that's being made in the stadium, which you'll see west of the campus here. So welcome once again, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Dr. Quintanilla. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Scott Nishimura. And Scott is a reporter, an editor of our local government reporting, and turn it over to him. Scott?
Thank you, Mike. Let me activate my computer here. I'm Scott Nishimura, the government team editor at the Fort Worth Report and one of our Fort Worth City Hall reporters. Thank you to everyone who has taken time out of your schedule to come here tonight. I know some of you were at the State of the Economic Impact this morning, so you're bookending your day. First thing there this morning, and now you're here tonight. Thank you very much. I'd like to recognize members of the Fort Worth Report's government reporting team. Nicole Lopez covers environment for us and did a heavy lift on this script tonight. Cecil Lenzen covers Tarrant County. And in fact, she's off doing something over at the county tonight. And Kamal Morgan has just joined the report, and he's going to team up with me over at City Hall. So we're a 4-member team covering government, and we're going to have a lot of fun because this team is just kind of coming together. So let's just get right into the program. Jones Lang LaSalle, the global commercial real estate firm, reports that more than 66 gigawatts of data center capacity is under construction in North America. This represents an electricity requirement greater than that of Germany. According to JLL, infrastructure with a capacity of 26 gigawatts exists or is under construction in our state, surpassing Virginia by double. This build out according to JLL, promises to bring investment, jobs, economic diversification, and property tax revenue to our communities. But this growth, as we've reported, comes at a strain on natural resources, namely water and power. So this sets the stage for our conversation tonight. I would like to introduce our panelists who've taken time from their schedules to be with us tonight. Dr. Mohammed Itikul Islam is an assistant professor in computer science and engineering at the University of Texas at Arlington. His work on sustainability focuses on unraveling and managing the massive water footprint of large computer systems. Nikki Morris is a global energy executive with more than 20 years across upstream development, reserves and strategic business leadership as executive director of the Ralph Lowe Energy Institute at TCU. She drives industry partnerships, fundraising, and thought leaderships, connecting academia, investors, and policymakers to shape the future of energy and workforce development. And Jennifer Warren has spent 2 decades chronicling the shale revolutions, writing early breakout analysis about the Barnett and the Permian Basin's global impact. She's reported extensively about data centers and is a key contributor to DCEO magazine's annual energy edition. She's the founder of a consultancy, Concept Elemental, and her interest in land and resources come naturally as a 6th-generation Texan. All right, so we've got a bunch of ground to cover tonight. Let's just get right into the questions. We're going to start with an easy one. Nikki, what are data centers and why is there so much demand for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't think everyone realizes how often we are using what we call AI. So every time you turn on your car, you see the CarPlay button show up. Or you say, Siri, take me somewhere. Or you are watching DirecTV, is it on demand? And or you have a laptop, an iPad, and a watch that's constantly tracking everything. Everything we do today requires electrons. And it doesn't just sit in, I think a lot of people call it the cloud, right? It's just up in space. Well, maybe it will be one day, right? We'll see what Elon does. But for today, what we're talking about is there is actually hardware sitting somewhere that makes all these connections. And I really feel in talking to my kiddos at home that they completely forget on where things come from and how electrons move. So from the energy supply source, be it below ground or above ground, yes, we have outlets, but we are very fortunate as a country that those outlets usually always work. The rest of the world doesn't have that luxury. And I think it comes back to the question on why Texas is so key on the data centers is because we not only have really good skills on finding power and energy, but we also own a lot of land. We're really good at infrastructure. We bring capital here and we get really motivated entrepreneurs to do really cool things in our state. And so I think that's where you get the whole kind of elements of this data center growth and why Texas is so important with that. But we use the term data center a lot. I don't think people realize in their own day-to-day lives what that actually means and why it's so important. And do you guys see that slowing down? I don't. I mean, everything we do is even requiring more and more of that. Even my notes here, that's all chat. I mean, we got the questions and I put my thoughts down and I said, hey, make me a slide, 4 pages of this, and it took 5 seconds. We are gonna need stuff like that to be more productive in our day. And with some of the numbers that you were saying about Germany and the US, if we bring it home, and then I'll kind of let the others share their thoughts on this, about, I say, I don't know, maybe 480 somewhat gigawatts, right, in the queue. But in the queue means a lot of things. And if you talk to ERCOT, and we had the pleasure of having Pablo Vega, the CEO of ERCOT, on stage at TCU this past April, under half of those projects will ever be connected. They're not gonna be connected tomorrow. So I would just say, we need to pause. We've done a really good job through time on building not only things that we need. We have great real estate entrepreneurs, we have oil and gas tycoons, we have the land space, land administration. Jennifer knows that from the Barnett. I mean, we know how to do things here, particularly in North Texas, really well, which is why we're so attractive to continue doing business in this space. So I love that we get to have some of these conversations and talk about all the opportunities that exist. The one thing I leave all the operators with, and coming from oil and gas, we do a horrible job of talking about all the good things that come from our industry and what we do. It tends to be the media will pick up all the negative. And it's the same thing happening I see with the data centers. It's what all negative is happening with it and not all the positive things that are giving back to the communities on where these things are being developed. So hopefully we'll get to start changing the tone on some of that. But data centers are important, and I don't think they're gonna go away, but they may slow down on the pace that people are talking about because we can't build as fast as we need the power.
So Jennifer, how do we, you raise an interesting point. How do we tell right now which of these projects are more viable than others?
So I just wanted to also define data centers. So, because I think this is important to have a baseline foundation. Data centers are digital infrastructure. They're actually infrastructure, and they house a lot of complex machinery that require cooling and being powered. And they are also mission critical infrastructure assets that we require in this advanced economy. And part of this buildup is because of the growth of digitalization, cloud computing, all the streaming we do, Microsoft's Azure, serving enterprise clients, Google Cloud, all this. So you add the AI workloads on top of that, and that's where you get all this high performance compute, the AI workloads. And these are some of the most intense data centers. And as for the queue, so the number was that there's like 463 gigawatts, I think. And I just saw some slides today by ERCOT that only like 200 actually clear this new batch process. Like they're in the queue really. There's double, triple counting on some of the projects that get in the queue. And with this new audit that Governor Abbott recently talked about, that's also a signal to help thin the queue down. And from numbers I actually don't agree with the JLL numbers, but the numbers I have of what is actually coming on the books in Texas, realistically, that will likely get built to 2030 is like 12 to 15 gigawatts. And I've had this verified by a really big power producer that's national, that's in PJM and ERCOT. PJM is the Northeast region, and Northern Virginia is the #1 market in the United States. Also with Texas, you know, we're a huge economy. We're like 1/8 of global GDP just in the state of Texas. And we have a massive amount of fiber, which helps, like the Texas Triangle is just one big giant cloud node as well.
Okay. So one of the things we want to do tonight is address misinformation, and this is a question for the whole panel. What's the biggest piece of misinformation that you have heard so far in this burgeoning debate? Dr. Islam, I'm going to start with you on this because this could go back to the technology pretty easily.
Thanks, Scott. So my take on this would be a little bit different than I said, Jennifer and Nikki. I think there has been misinformation on both sides. We should not say that there should nothing to worry about data center growth, there is, but maybe it was a little bit exaggerated on the negative side when you talk about a lot of water consumption or a lot of energy that you need. However, I've also seen some sort of misinformation from the tech industry. So for example, one of the examples I want to give is there is a new talk of much better data centers which consume very little water, but they don't tell you that those little water will be actually concentrated in just 1 or 2 months. So that means over the year, if you spread them around, you'll see, oh, this data center is actually consuming 10 times less than a regular data center, but it is going to actually put the same amount of pressure during the summer months. So this is actually a big concern. Actually, they also know that's why when they are asking for infrastructure, they actually ask for very large amount of what they call the gallon per hour or gallon per day limit. So these are actually putting some stress on the water infrastructure. So I would say the numbers, they're cherry picking a little bit, but obviously it is exaggerated on the other side, because I think if anyone says that if we bring data centers here, we're going to create a drought just by the data centers, that's also not true. But that is kind of like the tone the media sometimes presents. So we also do not want that. So one of the things that I personally really want to see is more transparency from the data center industry, so that they tell us exactly what's happening. And there are a lot of good things about data centers as well, as Nikhil was mentioning. It is bringing a lot of economic activities here, and we have always been attracting a lot of data center in North Texas. Actually, even though we are not number one, like Virginia is number one in terms of data center, which before even the AI boom, we are actually a very good market. I think I'd say number 3 or number 4, right after Virginia, California, then Texas. So especially North Texas. So we want to have that, but we have to kind of like think about what are the consequences of having these data centers. And also, I feel like the data center industry is also trying to actually cooperate with the community. It's not like they just want to throw money at this problem, because they cannot solve this problem just by throwing money at these things. So yeah, this is actually a great opportunity for both of us, like the community and the data center industry, to work together to find the best solution for both.
I know you wanted to talk about water when we discussed this last week.
Yeah.
You went right to water.
Yeah, so again, coming from oil and gas, guess what? There's another product of that. It's water. You don't produce oil or gas usually without water, especially with the legacy production that we have here in the state. And so what is so cool to see, and going out to West Texas, and we take our students all the time, is to see what is actually happening on the R&D and technology side to commercialize the cleaning of produced water from oil and gas reservoirs and be used in the industrial use case. And it's happening already. Again, another point that people don't talk about, either in New Mexico or in Texas. And guess what? What do we have in our backyard and right under our feet? We have a fabulous reservoir from the Barnett Shale. And guess what? Why are so many of those wells inactive today? It's because they have too much water. Where do you think we can put that water? They're already on pad sites. They could already be used for industrial use case. We can clean it. It now comes back to 2 things we haven't touched on yet. We talked about Abbott's recent announcement, but it's policy. We can't move the needle because right now on the produced water, it's still considered a waste for our state. We got to turn that into another resource. And so there's economic understanding and getting things to commerciality to make them work and to make businesses want to throw capital at that and be more prudent and be much more conservative and use a circular economy approach for all of our industrial development, because we have unlimited surface water, or limited surface water, and we don't want to take our potable water for some of the other use cases. But why not go ahead and start transferring some of this into these concepts? And one project you guys should keep on your radar for sure is the Chevron and Texas Pacific Lands big development with Bolt Energy. It's a West Texas campus where they own the surface, they own the minerals, and guess what? There's a ton of natural gas in West Texas, and it doesn't get the right price to get it out of the basin and to the coast for LNG. So what are they gonna do? There's your power, there's your water, and you have plenty of land to do this. And so more things like this are gonna come up, and we love to see that, because again, you have to be pragmatic, you gotta find solutions. But I think a lot of these major companies, what we call hyperscalers, the Googles, the Metas, all of that, they are doing the community outreach, and that's really great to see. So I do think there's a lot in the queue we talked about, but the good projects that will actually get off the ground are gonna be the ones that are the prudent operators picking the right sites, where all the land due diligence has been done. That's a massive undertaking. If anyone's worked in the land space and legal space, this is not something you do overnight. And so I think people forget this timing component on putting all this acreage together. Think about just like what they did in the Barnett Shale boom, you had to get thousands of acres together. That's hard to do in a metroplex and get everyone on board. So if you're gonna change a surface use agreement, right-of-ways, whatever the case may be, it's not gonna happen super quick. But the good operators are sending boots on the ground to go figure out where these sites need to be and check all the boxes so they have the power, so they have the water, they get to the infrastructure. Maybe they're not on a transmission line and it's behind the meter. We haven't talked about that. There are projects that are moving slightly quicker that are gonna be behind the meter. Do you guys know what that means? Behind the meter is not saying, hey, I'm gonna go tie to the grid the same connection point that goes to your house. They are completely self-sufficient in their power. Now, however, if they produce too much power, i.e. over 75 megawatts, then the grid can say, hey, we might need you one day, okay? So there are legislation and policy, but again, just as the city's doing, right? We had the new announcement, there's Dr. Slattery's keying up to take on this new commission for the city to talk about these things for the Fort Worth community and about transparency, but the legislation and policy and all the things are kind of playing catch up. We needed it yesterday. That's the problem. From the people that are actually producing the chips and the data centers, and I mean, the exponential incline and all of that in the power demand is huge. So it's here. It's just not gonna happen and get built as fast as they would like. So I think that's some of the caveats behind meter, picking good sites, having the good operators, and why not use some of our other, what we're constituting as waste today, may be another resource or a revenue stream for other companies in the future if we can get there on the policy.
And we're gonna talk here a little bit about this notion of good operators versus not, because it has come up repeatedly in the conversation here in Fort Worth. Jennifer, misinformation.
So misinformation, and I think this is that the not good operators have gotten a lot more of the attention on their projects than the good ones, and I wanted to build off what Nikki was talking about and Dr. Mohammed, is that in Dallas, we have some of the top data center developers in the country, and they're national, they're global. There's one called Aligned Data Centers, and I've interviewed that CEO in a feature a couple of years ago, and they put out a lot of information about what constitutes good practices. And they're actually building some real state-of-the-art data centers in Arizona and using very little water with closed-loop systems. And so water use is a big piece of misinformation, and new builds increasingly use very little water. I just talked to a developer yesterday who actually built some of the early data centers in Dallas and around the country, and there's a site in Garland that Digital Realty built back in 2004. And for one, it's a huge data center campus, and there are no noise complaints. There's no complaints, period. You know, they make good neighbors. These facilities have to be really well built. They have to be clean because you do have really intense, you know, all these high performance chips, GPUs, CPUs, everything that's going into them now. And so they have to be built to a really, really critical high standard. And the other thing too to note is data center developers, it's really, their alignment is with sustainability because they want to reduce power costs, water costs, cost of capital, land use efficiency. Increasingly, you know, a lot of data centers are spread all out, and they're starting to go vertical now too, just to help with the land use. So there is this big push to be more efficient, get more performance out of existing assets, which includes energy assets as well. So I think all of this alignment of sustainability is there. I mean, the top hyperscalers, you know, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, I mean, they have sustainability goals, and so they're actually buying a lot of the clean power in the country, but we're also going to be building a lot of natural gas ahead because we need firm power. And so like what Nikki was saying, you know, in West Texas, like Microsoft is doing a big data center with Chevron out in Pecos, and it's going to be like 2.67 gigawatts, and it's going to use brackish water. And they outline, because they have a San Antonio footprint, they outline all of the tax revenues that they pay, the jobs that are going to get created. So all this information is really online. If you just Google Microsoft blog San Antonio economic benefits, you'll pull up all this information. So it's out there, and it's just a matter of it getting heard, instead of just sort of squeaky wheel stuff.
Hey, let's talk about this closed loop technology, because there's been a lot made of that. Dr. Islam, so to what extent do data centers today use this technology? How does it work? And what kind of savings in water use do you get? You got a couple of minutes for this, and you got to explain it like we're all third graders.
Yeah, sure. So I think when we hear about data centers, typically it comes with a megawatt number, right? So or we'll be talking about that many gigawatt of energy requirement. All these gigawatts or megawatts of energy will become heat inside the data center. So that means there's actually kind of like lot of energy burning there, a lot of heat generated, you need to get rid of them. So that's why data centers actually need a lot of cooling, and water is one of the best conductor of heat, because they can actually absorb a lot of energy for every degree Celsius change. So when we say closed loop, we mean that water is being used for carrying the heat from the data center inside the data center where the servers are, take them outside to the cooling facility, and a closed loop system will actually cool down the same water and then bring it back. So it's running in a loop. That's why it's called closed loop. Basically, you are taking the hot water outside, cooling it, and then bringing it back, and then again it becomes hot from the inside of the data center. So that's the closed loop idea. Ideally, it should be totally dry, zero water consumption. If you can actually cool it down, the water from outside whatever facility that you are using. But traditionally, even closed loop system have some water footprint because they cannot run the same water forever. They have to get rid of the water and then replenish it again. That's why kind of like dry cooling is almost, you can say, zero water, or sorry, dry cooling is zero, but closed loop is almost zero water consumption. But the downside of this closed loop system would be that you cannot really run them, as I was mentioning before, all year round, at least not in Texas. There are some places you can probably run them for more time of the year. So basically the idea is you have the hot water outside, you have to come up with a way to get rid of the heat. You can use outside colder air, things like that. And traditionally, other industry, even data centers were built before we're caring about a lot of water consumption. We'd use evaporation cooling. So basically you evaporate some water outside, and that helps you cool down your data center more efficiently. Evaporative cooling is actually more efficient than most dry cooling, but they consume a lot of water, so we do not want to use water, but we're going to actually increase our energy footprint a little bit, because if we go to closed loop system. But again, closed loop systems are still new. I would not say, I would say newer data centers are all trying to use that, but it is not all the data centers are using it. So there are a lot of advanced cooling technologies out there, and there is also innovation going on. Actually, UT Arlington have many faculties working on this kind of not even just outside, even how to get the heat from the chips efficiently. They're also working on that. So I'm very hopeful about this area, that it's going to get better soon down the road. But right now, newer data centers are actually using this. The older data centers are not.
Is that technology, to what extent is it more expensive to develop and build?
So for example, if you have already a data center, it will be quite expensive to actually replace it, because you have to shut it down, or maybe have to retrofit something. So these are pretty expensive systems. So, but I would say for data centers, this is again my very personal opinion, is the infrastructure they're building, or the money they're spending on building the data center, compared to how much revenue they have out of these systems, they do not really come close. So they can actually spend more money. So I want to actually ask them, you should be the leader there are other industry who also use water, but they do not have this much revenue going on happening for them, so they cannot really afford. If we ask them to be also become zero water or dry cooling system on them to use, they probably will go out of business, but data centers won't. So that is actually, I would say, something that data center should do.
Okay.
And I don't have any solid number how much percentage it will decrease, but you know, you can say 10 times, 20 times less from a traditional data center, at least.
All right. I want to move into the topic of transparency. You all have already discussed this a little bit. Mayor Parker showed up at the Women's Policy Forum at Ridgely Country Club last week, and I think it was in response. I was there in response to a question from the audience. She suggested that data center operators could be doing a better job of explaining their technology and quote unquote what they're doing, talking about what they're doing. Do you all agree with this? Where do you think data centers could be doing a better job of explaining what they're up to and how their technology works? Who wants to go with that?
Well, I'll maybe kick it off by, again, how we get to the pleasure of doing this because we have students. I will say everyone likes to share their businesses and take field trips. And so we've had the pleasure of going to 2 sites very close to home. One, a 2 megawatt site right over here off of 183. Frank Kent Old Garage, for those that know, there is an awesome example of a mining site right there, and it's cooled. Part of it is a closed loop, and the chips are actually sitting in oil. Okay, so the computers are actually in a liquid to help keep the temperature, because again, where we are, it's hot a lot of the year. So that's one site. The other one, to complement what you were saying, is site visit Corsicana. Then you go to a 400 megawatt, Riot Platforms has, and invited us down to see. They were still building out, so it was just the phase 1 of this large, it's gonna be a gigawatt campus here soon, but we got to see the first phase of it. All of it was in these cooling things, as you're saying, incredibly clean, no dust, but all the computers are down in liquid form. And it's a really cool technology to say where it's going, and he already mentioned that they have 3 different generations of technology within the site. That's how quick it's changing, and that site's only been there for like 2 years. So the technology is going so quickly that the learning curve is going to be steep on some of these things. But to answer your question, should we be more transparent? Absolutely. I think there's one thing, as I can say from an operator type view, maybe not in data centers, is until you have all your final contracts and power purchase agreements and things buttoned up from capital and financing, you're hesitant to share. Because you don't want to lead expectations and then something not happen. So what these companies usually have are community engagement, government affairs, things like that. People that can talk to the community about what the company is doing, maybe not so much the specifics of each individual project. And I would highly advise groups like that. If they want to get into North Texas, they should absolutely get in front of community, universities, do things like this, where they can showcase what the rationale, what the technology, what these timelines really look like. You don't have to give all the numbers, but that would be a really good plus where we can see more collaboration, and then you're able to ask the questions and things like that. But it is really hard, I can say it, having lived it on the other side on previous projects, really hard to play all your cards when $10 billion hasn't been confirmed, you're not sure what the timing is. I mean, this is the type of scale we're talking about. These are billions of dollars that are being spent on some of these projects, and so they're probably a little hesitant to share too much until you get all the green lights.
So the contention, obviously, from a lot of skeptics is that these folks are being deceitful. Is that?
No, I don't see that. Having met with so many of these groups and taking students out to the field, they're excited. There's a lot going on. I just think they're that busy. I think there's some of that then these companies, if they're going to be in a community, then they need to lean into it. And they just need to show up and have a dedicated person to do that. But I don't think it's an ill intent. And I think too, that's why at the state level and maybe at the city level, we can implement some things to help encourage that earlier on in said project. Even for any big development projects, or think about TCU's master plan. We went to market with it, but no one knew that how many years before that actually master plan got released, right? There's a lot of drawings and a lot of discussions and a lot of things happening behind the scenes before then it had its kind of revealing this past November. So I think there's some of that, and so we just need to keep asking, keep showing up, and I think we'll get there.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I was just gonna talk a little bit about, building off what you were saying, Nikki. Yeah, there is a lot of private, competitive, proprietary information with some of the technology. So if we're talking about AI technology and if we're talking about the hyperscalers, there is a lot of transparency, I think, already in press releases. Like every time you see these big announcements that we've been seeing since early January, now they've become more granular, I think, in the last year and a half, where they're explaining what's actually happening at a data center. For example, there's a firm called Iran, I think it's Irene, and they were once Bitcoin miners, and they kind of migrated into HPC, high performance computing. And they have a project in Childress, and it's 750 megawatts. 650 is energized now. Microsoft is a big off-taker. NVIDIA is supplying HP 300s, which are like state-of-the-art GPUs. So they already talk about what they're going to use. You see this in various firms, what are called neoclouds, and they're actually, a lot of them came from Bitcoin mining, and they're transitioning now into also doing AI workloads and cloud computing. So they're kind of like running in parallel with the hyperscalers. And this year, the hyperscalers are just the top four are going to spend like $725 billion on capex for the build out. So we are talking lots of money, and like an estimate is for 1 gigawatt, it's about $50 billion, and probably 60% of that is GPUs. It's the tech. So it's a lot of money. There's a lot of competition with the hyperscalers and the neoclouds, but I think they're all providing a lot of information if you just look. I mean, on LinkedIn, a lot of them have pages like Applied Digital. They actually sit there and video and show what they're doing behind the scenes on building cooling systems and things like that. Aligned Data Center is a good developer in Dallas. They do the same. So there's a lot of information out there if people just want to look and take a little time.
We've already talked about misinformation. Dr. Islam, you talked about reasons to be concerned. What do any of you have are there things about data centers that people should justifiably be very concerned about?
So before I want to share my own perspective on the transparency thing. So I do agree with both Nikki and Jennifer that there are a lot of information out there, but when we as academics try to go deep, we don't find anything. So I personally do not want to have a transparency dictated by the other party. We should have a transparency dictated by the policymakers, because I feel like they are always showing great things, but if you look at the overall numbers, they don't match. We see very good advanced technology in many data centers, yet Google's number, if you look at their water consumption, it is a lot, and then it actually grew a lot in the last few years. So they are just showing us the poster child, but then behind the scene, there are many places they're doing the same thing as before. So if we just allow them to dictate what they want to tell us, then it's not going to work for us. I guess down the road we're going to see, 5 years back they've been doing this, we were not aware. But absolutely, there is more information out there than regular people think. A lot of engineers out there, they're actually sharing their ideas, inside stories. Even when you meet them in person, they are excited about it. So they are also excited about how the things are moving. But sometimes even they cannot share information just because it is, let's say, going against their business ideas, or like they want always want to say that everything is fine. That's not the case, right? And the main concern that I would have is, actually, there are a lot of nuances in these problems. For example, I want to bring this up. The moratorium that we have on the data center, it is for the power grid, right? Now, actually, this is actually sending an interesting message, as Nick was mentioning, behind the meter development. So now a lot of data centers will think, or the data center manufacturer will think, if we build a data center which is not connected to the grid, we can do whatever we want, almost, right? We can have bad or like not good water technology because we do not want to, we are not breaking any law, we are not connected to the grid. I can burn a lot of fossil fuel there, which is also not good, right? So we do not just want to have this kind of policy where we are looking at one side but not every other side. I'd say this is actually a big concern for me. Again, I want to reiterate, whenever I personally try to dig deeper, find solid numbers, they always actually, either they give like yearly average and they hide important information. That has been my observation and my experience, unfortunately.
I was just gonna say that in terms of some top-down things like what you could do as a policymaker to help with even understanding what's going on is like maybe develop a checklist. Like okay, what are some metrics that we can use to benchmark developers against each other, and one of them is called a PUE, and that's a power usage efficiency metric. And many data center developers will state what their PUE is. In fact, all the big hyperscalers do that. That's one. The other thing, there's just basic information you want. You want to know what the IT capacity is, what the megawatts being used is, what the timelines are going to be for the project, who's funding it, who owns it. Just a lot of transparency surrounding ownership and the flow, the tenants, just the structure of what that data center is going to do, and over time. Because I think a lot of the good developers also, they're building for decades. They're not just building for 5 years or 10 years. And so that audit is really a good way to, cut out some of the speculation or speculative developers. And we saw that movie in Texas with solar developers. Once there were all these subsidies available, it was like a land rush, and so you've had that kind of happening as well with this queue, and that's, again, going to get thinned out. There can also be some odd unintended consequences with the queue, and that would be that depending on your place in the queue, it can be quite valuable, and so it could be interesting to see if there's going to be some churning of the queue in the future.
Okay, let's this is a perfect segue to the next question, and we're coming back to the idea of good operators. So there was a turning point, I think, in the conversation this summer at the Fort Worth Zoning Commission in July, where the commission was debating regulations, and I think two of the commissioners raised this question about whether there was a way in these regs to reward good operators who are trying to do right. So, and this idea has come up repeatedly in these conversations, but so probably dovetailing on what you were just talking about, how does anybody recognize what a good operator is, and how do we build that into our regulatory framework, either at the city or down in Austin?
I think we just started it.
Yeah.
I mean, doing exactly that is just, it's a hitting a pause to come up with exactly what Jennifer was saying is the checklist. So that, okay, if you can kind of share and be, again, it's back to transparency, just say, hey, how is this going? How is your financing structure? Who actually owns it at the end of the day? Who's gonna focus on the asset retirement when all of this is at a point at the 20, 30, 40 years down the road when it has to be cleaned up? Make sure that we check all of that, and I think that's going to be a good way of kind of keeping things in line, and it's probably gonna weed out, exactly right, maybe some of the queue. But keep in mind, if they made it in the queue, there's a land and there's an opportunity there. Someone's gonna go gobble that group up and or that said project, the good operator. So hopefully it's kind of survival of the fittest, and we see the better ones that can percolate and maybe pick up some of these other projects. I thought that was a great point that you made, Jennifer.
Yeah, I just wanted to add too, I mean, if you think about the origins of data centers, they were defunct commercial real estate assets that were like a Pilgrim's Pride warehouse in Richardson in 2002 that became the first data centers. In Arizona, it was a printing press that was no longer in existence. So these are like old industrial brownfield assets that became repurposed into this digital infrastructure, which represents this more of an advanced economy. And the United States is absolutely like the big leader in all the data center development. I mean, we're like, I don't know if we're 80% of what's going on around the globe in terms of development. We're leading, and we're leading too because we have all the hyperscalers here that are in fact funding and investing in a lot of this. And so I think there's some benchmarks and metrics amongst all of them that you could put together and identify what this looks like. And in terms of assets, you know, I've heard he's a really good developer, Compass Data Center. The CEO talks about, you know, when we go into these communities, we're thinking 100 years ahead. You know, we're not there short term because this is an infrastructure asset. It's a community public asset, and we're all going to benefit from it. And so I think, you know, some of these like big data centers that are getting built, some of them will be bought by REITs over time too, like the digital realties. They have a big REIT model. So there is a lot of big infrastructure developers, big finance, big tech, big energy, all coming together for this opportunity. And so I just hope that we all can try to find a way to benefit from it. And I don't know that there's a reward or an incentive you could just create outside of the transparency, because this is a public good, you know, but it's also run by a business. And you know, there's a lot of money to be made with AI tech, but its underpinnings is this physical asset that's in the community too.
All right, so Dr. Islam, so how do we objectively determine what a good operator is? And for everybody here, how does this make its way into city ordinance or state legislation?
So my take on this would be, whoever on the queue, you can always find who is better than other, but I would not say they're a good operator or a bad operator. You know, in that queue, maybe they're better than others, right? For example, again, I want more transparency than whatever they're doing right now. And another thing is, these data centers can become actually asset for the power grid because they're a large load and they're highly controllable. So you can really change the load rapidly. These are technical capabilities that data centers have, but they are not right now not willing to utilize that for the grid's purpose, because again, if you think about the revenue that they have from the running those systems, it doesn't make sense to slow them down and reduce energy consumption to help the grid. But things are changing in that sphere very quickly, so there are technical solutions coming up. I would say we want to have these kind of capabilities more for the data center, go beyond and look from the community's perspective, not from their perspective. Who is better than this guy or other guy, but rather let's see what we need, right? What kind of protection we need if suddenly we have this large amount of energy demand, or we have so many new data centers coming in, right? What we need, and then from there we will ask them. We do not want to just decide these are better so they can just build a data center. I don't personally, I would not endorse that. For example, the moratorium thing, now the data centers are actually encouraged to build gas power plants next to their own data centers and then think this is actually going well. It's not going well at all, right? If you are burning gas, you are also having a lot of carbon emission, right? We should also remember that. It's not just for today, right? Hundreds of years, right? We do not want those things. Let's say if you are building a new power plant next to a data center, go with renewables like solar, not just burning gas. You know? Even though we have a lot of it, but still.
Or nuclear, SMRs.
Oh yeah, nuclear is a whole other thing, you know.
They're coming.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about this audit that's going, that came out of Austin. First, we haven't talked much about what's going on with ERCOT, and just so everybody knows, we did invite ERCOT from a couple of different directions to serve on our panel, and they politely declined. But what has been going on at ERCOT in its ability to handle all these connections of data centers to our grid?
Well, I think that's $1 million question, is we can't build it as fast as we need it. And the supply chain and all of these businesses are such a hurdle. Actually building infrastructure and pipe for anyone that's in that space, midstream, anything, unless you had the contract 5 years ago, with what has happened globally and all of the ups and downs on tariffs and things like that, the cost to do business has gone through the roof on certain goods. And so is it gonna get built? Yes. But I think we just heard this past week, there was another report on a portion of this big transmission line for ERCOT that kind of went on pause, that's going out to West Texas. So again, I think it's just gonna slow down. It's just not gonna happen at the pace that everyone wants it to. And there's different policy and rates and things that they're converting to that they need to get up to speed with whatever this power demand and queue is actually going to be finalized, which is to be determined. Like, we don't know what's actually going to be built. And so they're forecasting and projecting. And so I think that is a tough one for them, if you were in their shoes, to project really how this build is going to go. They're trying. I mean, we were with Encore too, who also works closely with ERCOT and seeing their operations center. And there's a lot. There's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of people, they're trying to make it happen, but it's probably just not happening at the pace they want it to for the business.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Texas passed SB 6, and that was some legislation that helped start containing some of the development. And one thing that they did was, if you have a data center that's 75 megawatts or more, if there's a grid emergency, you have to curtail, and you have to go to backup generation, so you're not using the grid. And increasingly in the future with grids, period, there is this notion of flexible demand, and Texas is really good at it because we have a competitive market, and we actually have incentives for curtailing when those electrons are needed, for residences and small businesses. And so the competitive market is actually very good in Texas about that, which is very different than in PJM, the big Northeast grid, where it's a capacity market. And so in some respects, a lot of this load, this large data center load, is coming to Texas because of our access to land and energy, but also because of our flexible, competitive market where things can happen. There's more co-location behind the meter projects happening in Texas, and a lot of those behind the meters, though, they do eventually, the big hyperscalers want to be on the grid ultimately. They want to be a grid asset for the population. And the reason why behind the meter is happening is because it's speed to power. It's them getting able to use their data center as soon as possible because AI tech is moving fast and they want to be using the data center, basically. And so, yeah, I think ERCOT's doing a lot of heavy lifting, we're pioneers, really, in some respects.
And that's what I was going to say too. Globally, think about it. That's why they're all coming here too. We are the cheapest cost of power compared to anywhere else. and we have all the infrastructure, and we have the capital, and we have the manpower, and all the things to do this. So actually a lot of countries, Middle East is where they're thinking, I mean, they have a lot of energy as well. I mean, they're using this as, okay, how do we do things? And then they may navigate elsewhere. So we are kind of the testing ground, I think, on how this is gonna go for globally, for sure.
Okay, we've got some audience questions, and I think we've got time for one. And I want to get to, I want to ask you after that what people in this room can do to better figure this issue out for themselves. So here's the audience question. 5 years from now, if we look back at this build out, what's the specific commitment we should have insisted on today in writing and enforceable that separates a data center that made this community stronger from one that just left behind a substation and a higher electric bill? So the key, like, what commitments should we be asking for from data centers that are enforceable?
I think it's already happening. I mean, when you have the audit requirements that are being proposed about who's the owner, you know, what's your financing, what's the size, the IT load, the power load, all this stuff, that's already doing that. There are contracts that with if you're a developer and you're going to have to build a substation and transmission, that's part of a contract with the utility. That's a contract. So there isn't really anything the government can do. This is a private transaction, and we're a capitalistic market. So there's only so much top-down sort of things you can do to mitigate that. There's going to be risks taken. There's going to be things built. But they're expensive infrastructure, as I've mentioned. So I think the alignment is there to not take undue risk. The crazy looking risk is kind of the big Q. I mean, that just looks, ridiculous. It's not real. It's not a real number even. It's real in terms of people, being represented 3 times in the queue, but the real projects are much less than that. And so, I mean, I don't see, with our system we have in place, I don't see that happening, actually.
I would ask that the communities in which they are going to operate their business, they leave it better than where they found it.
Now, is that in, what does that mean? I mean, is that
It mean a lot of
enforceable
things.
somehow?
Yeah, it's enforceable.
That's the
So I think
question.
it comes back to
Yeah.
a metric, but I don't know, you don't know what those metrics are, right? We think about, these could last 40 years, these could last 100 years. Right now we're saying 20, everything's at 20-year limit because that's the economic profile of some project. And so that's where they cut it off. But that means they need to give back to the community in which they work. And I think we just keep it simple like that, be it universities or schools or the nonprofits in the area or some sort of education, knowledge transfer, workforce development, all the things at different levels that you can do when you bring in a bunch of new blood and a new infrastructure into a community. There's so much good that can happen with that, and new faces and whatnot. So leave it better than when you found it.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that exactly that is happening. Like, for example, Applied Digital in North Dakota, they do everything that Nikki was just saying. And also, I've seen the case of Microsoft in San Antonio doing the same thing. And they actually have like a whole sheet showing exactly what they're doing and what the benefits are going to be, what it's going to be in 2028, all this. So I think there are like good benchmarks of how you do leave things better and create a better footprint, where the community can share in the benefits. And so I think that's happening. But yeah, maybe you need to do best practices along with a checklist.
Let me move on to this last question. So, do you have thoughts on? Okay. what can concerned citizens do to figure this issue out? And
So information-wise, again, I think the information right now we see, they have agenda behind it, not necessarily 100% truth. So I think we need to look at all these different sources, and also maybe talk to people who like Fort Worth Report, like who doesn't have any agenda behind it, right? So basically, all the reports that we see from the data center builders, they often paint a better picture than what it is outside. So, and I believe we should have also some efforts to create some trustable sources as well. So this is actually falls on us, academics, and also like you.
thank you for the shout out. Jennifer.
No, I think that's right, is nonpartisan information. Because there is a lot of commercial information, but I think that can be built on, and universities, have different research agendas and things like that. So there might be, sort of more of a clearinghouse, and you would think Texas is like one of the best places to do this, because we have so many universities, like a consortium of, nonpartisan information, because we're also building the most. So in fact, we could be building that, what those best practices are, what are the metrics that we want to see, all this. I mean, it's just right there for the taking. We could ask Claude to put it together.
All right, I think we are at time. We'd like to thank our great panel again, Mohammed Islam, Nikki Morris, and Jennifer Warren. Thank you very much. And thank you to our audience and for your engagement and readership and very high expectations of us. So at this point, I'm going to hand the mic back to Mike.
Okay, again, thank you so much, Scott. Thank you, panelists. We really appreciate it. Let's give another round of applause. This is clearly an issue that's not going to be going anywhere soon. You're going to see a lot more reporting from our newsroom and our reporters and our partners KERA, who are here tonight as well. Also up on the screen, you'll notice our nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom is made possible by the support of our members, many of them in this room right now. So please visit the membership table outside to learn more about how you can support free, fair, and local journalism. Also a quick save the date for our candidate forums coming up, covering county and state races taking place in this very room, October 7th and 8th. So we will see you again soon. And
May I have the floor?
yes,
This is a really important announcement. We have a ton of leftover sandwiches. Welcome you to take whatever you would like to take home tonight.
so what I'm hearing is there's a lot of leftovers for school lunches tomorrow. All right, thank you again, everybody. Have a great evening.